Hello and welcome dear students. Today our topic for deliberation is class, kinship, Varna and the caste of ancient India between 300 BC to 300 C. The main objectives of this lecture are to know about the role of kinship in the formation of caste system, to study about the origin of Gotra and the Jati, to know about the differences between Varna and Jati, and finally to study about the concept of Varna in Buddhism. In North India, there is evidence that the socio-economic classes began to form in 6th century BC. In Buddhist literature, difference in wealth and status are mentioned. There are references to extremely destitute individuals known as Dalhida. Contrasts are established between fortunate wealthy people and unfortunate poor ones, who are known as Mahabhoga Kula, Dalhida Kula, Sadhana, Adhana, Sughata and Dughata. These inequalities stem from differences in ownership of productive resources, particularly land. Kinship relationships remained crucial despite the formation of social groups and were later incorporated into the caste system. Beyond the immediate family, there is an extended kin group that is referred to as Nati and Nati colony. Natikas included both maternal and paternal family members. Kula is used to refer to a large patrilineal family. The fact that the monastic rules were altered to make exceptions for family ties, despite the fact that Buddhist monks were supposed to have rejected family ties, indicated the significance of kinship. For instance, although monks were typically prohibited from traveling during the Vasa, which was the monsoon season, some communications with family members might still be maintained during this time. Although they were not typically allowed to go to war, they may, if they needed, to visit an ill or elderly relative. We can also see how Mahapajapatan Gautami and Ananda influenced the Buddha personally. For example, when it came to the decision to allow women into the Sangha, the Buddhist monastic order provided a partial replacement for the worldly entanglement of kinship links by offering an alternative bonding of brotherhood, or we can say sisterhood, or we can say in case of nuns. However, it demonstrated how strong traditional familial relationships were at the time that it did not attempt to totally replace or eradicate them. The social discourse of the Brahmanical tradition was centered on the fourfold division of Varnas. The Varnas were ideally meant to be endogamous, meaning that marriages were meant to happen inside the community. However, there were some inter-Varna marriages between a higher Varna man and the lower Varna women that the Dharma Shastra approved of. These hypergamous unions were known as Anhuluma marriages. Conversely, Prathiluma union marriage between a woman of a higher Varna and a man of a lower Varna were forbidden and were known as hypogamy. A woman who was a Brahmana and Shudra man were involved in the worst kind of Prathiluma marriage. The discussion of and the evaluation of inter-Varna marriages in these texts suggests that such unions did occur and that Varnas were not strictly endogamous. The relationship between Varna and the occupation in the Abhada Dharma theory found in the Dharma Shastra texts also demonstrate the contradiction between theory and practice. People from four Varnas should ideally pursue the occupation that are assigned to them. Studying and teaching Vedas, offering sacrifices for oneself and others, and exchanging gifts are all ideal activities for a Brahmana. The activities of the Kshatriyas are learning, making sacrifices for oneself, giving gifts, and the most importantly, protecting others. The first three activities are shared by the Vaishyas, although his preferred lines of work included farming, raising cattle, trading, and lending money. The upper Varnas were supposed to provide the Shudra with his means of subsistence. However, a person might be compelled to seek occupations that would typically be viewed as improper for members of his Varna in time of emergency, struggle or distress. This was totally alright according to the Dharma Shastra. It demonstrates that people were in fact not following to the standards of Varna Dharma because they had to modify their ideal system in order to accommodate the two crucial issues of marriage and profession. The Varna order is also mentioned in Buddhist and Jain texts. But for them, the strong theological legitimacy that the Brahmanical tradition gave it was absent. It was regarded as a human creation founded on innate tendencies and abilities. However, in both of these traditions, the Kshatriyas was ranked higher than the Brahmanas in Varna system. An essential component of Brahman identity was Gotra, which means a lineage. The Buddha always refers to Brahmanas by their Gotra in Buddhist writings. We can also observe how non-Brahmins use the Gotra name. Mahavira is said to have had the Kashyapa Gotra, while the Buddha himself is frequently referred to as Gotama, the Pali form of Gotama. This might be related to the parity that the Jains and the Buddhist traditions sought to uphold between Brahmanas and their own presbyters. It's also likely that non-Brahmins adopted the Gotra of the presbyter who belonged to their family Brahman group. Although Jati was now competing with Varna as a source of social identity, Varna was still relevant. The ingenious but fictional hypothesis of the mingling of Varna applied it by the Dharma Sutras to explain the origin of Jati. Jatis, in accordance with this, were the offsprings of numerous inter-Varna marriages. The Dharma Shastra tradition was able to support the Varna theory in this way while also recognizing and explaining the existence of Jatis. The roots of the caste system may be seen in 6th century BCE. While it is unclear to what extent endogamy and more particularly commonality, that's the rules of interdining and receiving water and types of food from others, were fully established at the time. In some ancient texts, the term Varna, Jati and Kula are interchangeably used, but at other places they have specific meaning. The names Brahman and Kshatriya had importance, and the Varna order remained a crucial point of reference. In contrast, few Vaishyas or Shudras are mentioned in the Pali canon, despite the fact that the Brahmins and the Kshatriyas are frequently mentioned. The majority of descriptions of people who in theory fit into these groups make references to their particular occupation, which was associated with Kula and Jati. This implies that Varna was more of a theoretical basis associated with higher categories and that a person's identity in the society at the times was based more on their occupation, which is Kula, means a lineage, and Jati means a caste. Holbrook believes that the Varna system was the progenitor of the Jati system. The two were never cleanly differentiated in ancient classical literature, and their relationship was characterized by partial overlaps, interactions, and osmosis. The Portuguese word castes, which also refers to tribes, clans, races, or lineages within human communities, is the source of English word caste. Portuguese traders who were active on the western coast in the 16th and 17th centuries used it for the first time in relation to the Indian society. Despite the wide range of caste interpretations, there are two main categories. On the one hand, there is the materialistic perspective, which sees caste as something that uses an idiom of purity and contamination to cover up and justify materialistic inequalities. The idealist argument, on the other hand, sees caste as primarily the result of religious and cultural concepts of purity and contamination. A different interpretations places more emphasis on the relationship between caste and politics, particularly the emergence of kinship and the kingdoms. It is difficult to pinpoint the first origins of jati. The hereditary character of crafts and the occupations, the incorporation of tribal groups into the wider Brahmanical folds, and a social structure that emphasized birth and regulated hierarchy through marriage laws and endogamy may all have contributed to their development. Geographical and occupational distinctions were significant contributors to the development of segmented identities. It is undeniable that the Dharma Sutra notion of Varna Samaskar was required in order to accommodate and place many groups into the greater social structure. Higher jatis, known as Ukta jatis, and lower jatis are terms used in Pali writing as Hina jati. The later group contains the Chandals, or we can say Chandala jati, basket makers known as Vina jati, hunters known as Nishada jati, charioteers and sweepers known as Puksa jati, while the earlier group includes Brahmanas and Kshatriyas known as Ukta jati. The texts make a strong connection between jati and occupation and suggest that different jatis had quite different social positions. The Vishnu Dharma Sutra, written between the 1st and the 3rd century CE, has the first use of the term Aspashreya in the sense of a social group that was destined by virtue of birth to be viewed by others as permanently untouchables. But it is undeniable that untouchability, a severe kind of social marginalization and oppression, has existed for a long time and only became worse through time. Chandals were occasionally classified as Shudras in early Dharma Shastra writings, but a distinction between the two was made fairly quickly. Although there were disagreements among the Samritikaras, who were known as lawgivers, on precisely which group should be classified as untouchables, the Chandals were almost universally accepted. According to Apastamba Dharma Sutra, a Chandal's birth is the result of bad deeds carried out in the previous life. According to this, a Brahmana who has killed another Brahmana or stolen gold is reborn as a Chandal. The Gautama Buddhayana and Vishishta Dharma Sutra defines the Chandal as the result of the lowest Prathiluma union between a Shudra man and a Brahmin woman. These examples highlight the low origin of Chandals. The Dharma Sutras frequently compare Chandals to dogs and the crows, demonstrating their strong hatred against them. They openly argue that any interaction with the Chandal, no matter how accidental, is polluting. According to Apastamba Dharma Sutra, if one touches a Chandal, one should instantly jump into the water. If one speaks with a Chandal, one must immediately speak with a Brahman. And if one sees him, one must instantly gaze at the celestial bodies in the heaven, like the sun, the moon, or stars. Contact with the Antayajas, or we can say the inferior groupings, did not necessitate the use of such extreme cleaning methods. Simply washing the affected areas of the body or drinking water was sufficient. According to Gautama, a corpus or Chandal must not be present in the hamlet. According to the Dharma Sutras, men who had sex with the Chandal women were subjected to harsh penance and thus punishments. The writings of this period contain numerous references to male and the female slaves. According to the Digha-naika, a dasi is not his own master, is dependent on others and can't roam where he pleases. The Vinaya Pitaka describes 3 different types of slaves. Number 1, Antajatuko. Number 2, Dana Kikato. Number 3, Kara Mara Anhato. It appears that the Antajatuko refers to the offsprings of a female slave. A purchased slave is known as Danhakikato. The Karamara Anhato is a person brought from another country and forced into the slavery. The Digha-naika describes a 4th form of slavery as Samam Dasa Vavam Upahagota, who has voluntarily accepted servitude. A few references are made to the emancipation of slaves. In fact, one of the norms of Buddhist Sangha states that slaves could not join until their masters had freed them. Given the elite base of the literary sources, it is difficult to reconstruct how subordinate and oppressed groups like as Chandals and slaves may have reacted. Chakravarti has discovered two instances of resistance in Buddhist scriptures. The Vinaya Pitaka makes mention to Dasa Kamakaras of the Sakas attacking womenfolk of their lords in the forest as an act of revenge. The second story in the Mujhama Naika is about the Dasi Kali and her mistress, the Gahapatini Vidhi. Vidhi has a reputation for being exceptionally calm and peaceful. Kali, who was subservient and diligent, concluded that her mistress' even temper was a result of her own good behavior. She decided to administer a test to Vidhi. She began waking up late and did not answer her mistress' call for 3 consecutive days. Vidhi could not take it. She grew increasingly enraged and eventually attacked Kali in a fit of rage. Thus, Kali was vindicated. While it is feasible to identify such representations of social tension and conflicts in ancient Indian writings, it is considerably more challenging to discover the lives, voices, and the thoughts of subordinate and the oppressed communities. This is due to the fact that the subordination and marginalization typically included exclusion from literary culture. One of the problems for historians is to carefully and wisely read between the lines of existing texts in order to record the histories of those who lived on the peripheries of elite society. Now, dear students, let's throw some light upon the activities in times of adversity. The Gautama Dharma Sutra shows how within certain restrictions Varna responsibility may be transgressed in times of distress. The main focus will be the Brahmanas. A Brahmana is permitted to accept Vedic education from a non-Brahmana, walk behind him and obey to him. Upon completion of the study, however, the Brahmana becomes the most prestigious of the two. One may teach, officiate at the sacrifices of and receive presents from the individuals of all classes, with each successive vocations being more prestigious than the one preceding it. When these jobs are unavailable, one may rely on Kshatriya occupations, and when even these are unattainable, on Vaishya occupations. Some items were prohibited from the trade like perfumes, spices, prepared food, sesame seeds, hemp or linen cloths, skins, red-dyed or washed garments, milk and milk products, roots, fruits, flowers, medicines, honey, meat, grass, water, poison and animal for slaughter, and under no circumstances humans, bearing cows, heifers and the pregnant cows. According to some authors, land, rice, barley, goats, sheep, horses, bull, milk cows and oxen may not be traded. One is limited to exchanging animals for animals and seasonings for seasonings. Sesame seeds, salt and prepared foods are not permitted. However, one may substitute an equivalent quantity of cooked food for immediate use for uncooked food. However, if none of these is possible, one may support themselves through any occupation other than that of a Shudra. Some even tolerate that when one's life is at risk. However, even then, one is not permitted to associate with that class or consume forbidden foods. Even a Brahmana can use violence to defend himself in a life or death situation, and a Kshatriya can take up a Vaishya trades. Now, dear students, let's talk about Varna and Jati and its key concepts. One of the greatest feats of the Brahmanical tradition is the persistence of many people who still believe that the ancient Indian society was divided into 4 categories of Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas and Shudras. And some views Varna as the foundation of Jati. That was untrue. Although Varna and Jati are linked and both are hereditary social classifications, they are not the same. They differed greatly from one another, and these differences have evolved over time in terms of both number and nature. The total number of Varnas is 4, or we can say 5 if those beyond the Varna fold are included. But the total number of jatis, including castes and the subcastes, is so large that it is impossible to count them all, and their number are still increasingly today. Varna and the jati are both hierarchical classifications. The jatis, on the other hand, have some flexibility within certain ranges, although the order of the 4 Varna is fixed. The Brahmanas is at the top and the Shudra is at the bottom in the Brahmanical tradition. The order is still established in the Buddhist tradition, with the Kshatriya coming before the Brahmana. It's impossible to order that jatis from the highest to lowest on a single scale. The rank of the castes between the two could fluctuate, even though the Brahmanas typically sit at the top and so-called untouchable tribes constitute the bottom limit. In reality, caste rankings differ throughout locations and communities and are influenced by a variety of factors, including as ownership of land, wealth, and political and military might. Even Brahmanas and the outcasts may disagree about the caste hierarchy. Castes have recently attempted to upgrade themselves frequently. This process is known as Sanskritization and occasionally have been downgraded. Adapting customs from higher castes such as vegetarianism, keeping women at home, and changing one's area of work is a common part of upgrading. While there were rules that prohibited social interaction and forbade upper Varnas from accepting particular food from specific Shudra groups, the rules of commonality were more precisely established with relation to the jatis. These were built on concept of contamination and purity. Since a proportion of inter-Varna marriages, that is the Unhuluma one, were accepted, the Varnas were not truly endogamous group. Contrarily, the jatis were thought to be an endogamous, though certain hypogamous unions might have always been allowed. The jatis were connected with certain occupations, even though there were some occupations that were valuable to all, but the Varnas are associated with a variety of occupations. In the Varna system, it has been argued that function is more significant than birth. Members of a caste frequently assert their membership in a specific Varna groups, which is how Varna and Jati were associated. Without a doubt, the Jati system was tied to the Varna system in order to give the former the authority of Brahmanical tradition. For many years, families that were successful in gaining political powers frequently identified themselves as Kshatriyas. As a fundamental point of reference for the caste system, the Varnas may have quickly evolved into normative categories, but they nevertheless served a vital social purpose. However, Jati, not Varna, served as the actual practical basis for the person's social identity as well as the rules governing interdining, social interactions, marriage, occupation in early historical North India. To maintain the distinction between the Varna and the Jati, it is preferable not to translate Varna. In contrast, Jati can be rendered as caste, which includes subcastes. In addition, it is essential to recognize that social institutions are always evolving and changing. Likewise, the purpose and meaning of Varna and Jati have evolved over time. Subsequently, the precise nature of Jati system in ancient times can't be equated to modern setup. Now, dear students, let us throw light upon Buddhism and Varna. Ray David's analysis from Buddhist principles and recruitment practices shows that Jati was not a deciding factor in Buddhist Sangha. However, in reality, Buddhism's egalitarian concept could not affect anything outside of Sangha life. However, other aspects of society and social interactions continued to keep to the caste system's discriminatory practices. According to Ray Davids, had Buddha view on the day, the evolution of the social grades and the distinctions would have developed differently and the caste system would never have been built up. On the other hand, Oldenburg has noted that despite Buddhist theory acknowledging the equality of all individuals to be received into the Sangha's actual composition suggests that it was in no way consistent with the theory of equality and that a pronounced learning to aristocracy seemed to have lingered in ancient Buddhism. Similarly, according to Fick, Buddhism did not in any way hinder or even slow down the formation of caste. In his book, Hinduism and Buddhism, Charles Eliot makes the argument that although Buddha attacked both the ritual and the philosophy of the Brahmanas, ensuring that the sacrificial system never attained its former importance, he was less successful as a social reformer. Although Buddhism opposed the Brahmanistic ritualism, it did not advocate abolishing the caste system altogether. In his book Caste in India, E. Senneret also claims that the fight between the Buddhism and the Brahmanas were essentially a struggle for the power and that the Buddhist position did not intend to abolish the caste system entirely. So, dear students, it was all about today's lecture regarding class, kinship, Varna and caste of ancient India between the period 300 BC to 300 CE. Hope you have understood it well. See you next time with a new topic. Till then, take care and goodbye.